within the framework of which this conference has been organized. The research project is entitled Intermediality Images as Figurations of Intermediality and Post-Mediality in Central and East European Cinema. So our first lecturer in this panel is Ágnes Pethő from Sapientia University.
Okay, thank you. So this is the home team, so to speak, presenting the panel this time. And my paper has the title Becoming an Image, Theorizing the Tableau Vivant in Contemporary East European Cinema. And what I'm going to present here is still a work in progress and a part of a wider investigation focusing on the tableaux vivants of recent East European films. And although it may seem that this is a research with a very specific and narrow focus, I have found that it is much more productive to employ a wider perspective, at least in two respects. A, to analyze the tableaux vivants proper, that is, images imitating a particular painting or sculpture, together with other similar techniques in cinema, static tableau-like shots, or direct quotations of paintings like this one that you can see here, which become prominent within the cinematic image. And B, to observe how the rhetoric of such images may be connected to what happens on a much larger scale not only in East European cinema, but in contemporary cinema and art. Now, originally, as maybe you read the abstract, I intended to present a much wider set of ideas, but then I realized I cannot do that in 20 minutes. So I'm just advertising here that I have a forthcoming essay in which I have described the tableau vivant as a typical post-cinematic image linking cinema and installation art, which can be theorized as a container of sensations and gestures in the sense defined by Deleuze and Agamben. So this time I'm leaving this whole line of ideas out of this presentation, and I will emphasize the emergence of the tableau in East European films as a powerful agent in generating meta-narratives in the context of what may be seen as postmodern art. And in this respect, I will begin with embodied paintings and bodies objectified as paintings. In her book, The Material Image, Art and the Real in Film, Brigitte Peuker reminds us that in addition to parlor games in the 18th and 19th centuries, the tableau vivant also has its origins in pornographic staging of sexually enticing bodies, and considers that it is exactly, I quote, in its manifestation of embodied painting, often as or through the female body, and through, I quote again, the flesh of the human presence, that the tableau vivant figures the introduction of the real into the image, the living body into painting, thus attempting to collapse the distance between signifier and signified. Now, as already she has pointed out in her previous keynote lecture, there's also a possibility of conceiving the tableau vivant as a reversal of this process of the emergence of the uncanniness of these static bodies, and in which embodiment is not erotic in nature, or at least not in its conventional sense, but can be related to what Mario Perniola described as, I quote, the sex appeal of the inorganic, resulting in a fascination with the image itself, not with painting viewed in the form of real, living, breathing bodies, but with becoming an image, with bodies objectified as paintings or objects of art. Accordingly, the tableau vivant may not attempt to merge representation with the real and to collapse the distance between signifier and signified, but emerges as a site for cultivating their distance in the opposition of sensual form and abstract meaning, moving image and static painting, live bodies in action and objects contemplated as a visual display, thus framing their intricate plays of in-betweenness. I have found that in some of the films I analyzed, the tableau, both in its narrower or wider sense, encloses almost irreconcilable extremes, from a sensation of corporeality in pictures coming alive as embodied paintings, to the distantiating effect generated by conspicuous artificiality and stylization. Now, I think this is the same dynamics that Perniola speaks of when he writes, I quote, "It would seem that things and senses are no longer in conflict with one another, but have struck an alliance thanks to which the most detached abstraction and the most unrestrained excitement are almost inseparable." So cadaverous tableaux vivants in this sense. Now, the quintessential image framing such antithetical extremes of things and senses can be identified in the type of tableau vivant that is paradoxically closely connected to the idea of death, in which a live body is displayed as a corpse, or the other way around. A corpse is presented as an embodied picture, an object of art made of flesh. The most extreme example, and also kind of literal presentation of the desire described by Perniola to become an object, can be found in György Pálffy's Taxidermia, a Hungarian film made in 2006. I'm not sure if any of you, some of you are familiar with this film, then you know what I'm talking about. The film presents the lives of 3 consecutive generations, or rather, as one critic called it, degenerations of men, each becoming a grotesque caricature of their era leading up to the present. Now, the film concludes with a shocking sequence in which we see how, after stuffing the corpse of his own obese father, the protagonist's body is literally being disemboweled, stuffed, stitched up, and eventually transformed into an artwork, a body sculpture, reminiscent of paintings depicting the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian and the Hellenistic torsos, and exhibited in an art gallery in front of an audience, also posing as a tableau vivant. Now I'm going to show you a very short clip without sound. So both the audience in this art gallery is posing motionless in an uncanny manner like a tableau vivant, and we'll see the stuffed corpses displayed as sculptures, body sculptures. I spared you the gruesome images of seeing the actual process, how he managed to stuff himself as a body sculpture. So thus the film presents a bizarre and even self-reflexive tale of survival, moving his characters out of so-called goulash communism directly into an aestheticized freak show displayed for the entertainment of Western art consumers. Stephen Shavira, who wrote an essay on the film, called the film viscerally charged and icily allegorical. And as a whole, Pálffy's film is an uncanny combination of social satire and concept art. Now, on a more abstract level, the paradoxical tableau displaying a corpse captures the potentially cadaverous nature in all tableaux vivants. As Ora Zatz pointed out, I quote, "The living picture lacks articulation, vocal, physical, and narrative. It has ossified into rigor mortis, and if and when it slackens, this is only so as to shift into the next pose, the next statue, or to snap out of it and back to normal fluid life. The tableau vivant is in fact a temporary cadaver, a presence which has petrified into object." Now, moreover, we can add that a tableau can be conceived as a cadaver of a cadaver, referring always to a body image outside of its own. The taxidermied corpses at the end of Balfi's film perform this mortification of dead bodies into other bodies, becoming art exhibits that we may also find in other examples in which stylized images are built on the opposition between life and art, sensual and abstract, fossilizing human figures into dead iconographical forms. Now we see this also in the paraphrases of Andrea Mantegna's and Hans Holbein's Dead Christ that have become a surprisingly recurring motif in contemporary East European cinema. The examples include, as you see some pictures here, the Hungarian Kornél Mundruczó's Johanna or Delta, or Benedek Fliegau's The Dealer here below, which imitates in a way Hans Holbein's body of the elongated body of the dead Christ. In Béla Tarr's last film, The Turin Horse, a film that maybe you are more familiar with, it is no less than the end of the world that is prefigured by presenting the protagonist both as the embodiment of Mantegna's and Holbein's Dead Christ. These shots make us aware how, despite a heightened sensation of photographic realism in details, everything is stylized here. Bodies become framed and reframed as images, and eventually these images fade away. Now, perhaps the most complex use of the reproduction of Mantegna's painting can be found in the Russian Andrei Zvyagintsev film, The Return, where it becomes not only a clearly marked vantage point that doubles the reference frame of the narrative, suggesting the possibility of an allegorical reading, but it also initiates an intricate play between images and media, which convey these images. The film is about two teenage boys whose father returns after a long and unexplained absence. Have you seen the film? Anyone seen the film? Not really? Yes? No? Okay, so it's two teenage boys who have not seen their father for a very long time, and then suddenly, out of the blue, they come home from playing, and their mother tells them that your father is here. And the first time they encounter, for a long, long time, their father, the absence of the father is not explained, is in the form of a tableau vivant. So his father is asleep and in the posture that we recognize from Mantegna's painting. So as the boys don't remember him, they look at him and then run off to compare the photo they have of him with the image appearing to them in the bedroom. I'm going to show you now the sequence. It's as if the elements of the painting have been displaced. This is the grieving mother, in fact, the mother-in-law, separated in a different room, and then we'll see the body of the father. Okay, so we saw how the boys stand in the doorway in awe and look at their father as if contemplating a strange exhibit in a glass cage. The father, who has until now existed as a figure in a photograph tucked away in the attic in an album illustrating biblical scenes, placed, therefore, already in the category of symbolic images, materializes in an embodiment of a painting as an image, an idea, an incarnation of the myth of the father also. Now, when he awakes, we see these symbolic images. When he awakes, he continues to be distant, unsympathetic, eager to assert his paternal authority, and enigmatic. He sits down to a final meal together with the two women, mother and grandmother, and his children, in a shot reminiscent of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. Then he sets out on a mysterious voyage together with his sons. The story unfolds within a mythical time frame, beginning with Sunday, when the Father Creator rests, and ending with Friday, when the Christ-like Father dies, along clearly symbolic axes, horizontally undertaking a symbolic voyage of initiation as the father takes the boys on a road trip, and vertically, as the film is also framed by the image of a tower, the acts of ascent, descent, rise, and fall. The father will die falling down from this tower accidentally in the end of the film. So the title of the film, The Return, may be interpreted both literally, referring to the father who returns, and symbolically, given that the film introduces the sleeping father as the replica of the dead Christ and presents events leading up to his actual death, which in this way can be seen as a return to the initial state, even showing the corpse of the man lying in the boat in the seminal manner. So it is actually the loss of the father that returns. But while the body of the father disappears in the murky water of the lake, and the impression of Mantegna's painting is washed away by the photogenic layer of the waves within the cinematic frame, the power of the image itself is reinstated and reinforced, as what has been lost in painting is now regained in photography. The film ends with a series of photographs in which the father is absent, yet we are now aware of his existence either off space or behind the camera. These final photographs, used as a substitute for the diary of the boys, contrast the performativity of the instantaneous personal snapshots, being singular, subjective, incidental, and imprints of bodies in motion, with the constructedness, stasis, and symbolical weight of pictorial iconography manifest in the explicit Tableau Vivant scene, as well as with the sensuous elements of the moving image. Thus, the film rounds up different possibilities of people becoming images and images moving from one medium onto another, from the lost art historical aura and symbolism of the Mantegna painting to pictorialist photography and to the intimacy of the family pictures. In this way, the allegory is as much about our indissoluble, intimate relationship to images and the relationship between image, body, and differences in medium, as it is about Oedipal rites of passage standing in for contemporary traumas in a post-communist society. Now, Zviagintsev's next feature film, The Banishment, expands the theme of the loss of the father into the disintegration of the traditional family, the loss of the mother, the loss of faith, and the banishment from paradise, meaning family life and faith, within a complex, dreamlike narrative. You haven't seen this film either. Some of you have. Okay. So, in the film, the story revolves around an enigma. The wife tells the husband that she is pregnant, but this is not his child. Therefore, she undergoes. They agree to that she undergoes an abortion, and she dies as a consequence of this abortion. Later, we find out in a flashback sequence that it was in fact the child of the husband, only their relationship has cooled off to a degree to which she considered it not their child. So it is a complex, very beautifully filmed, painterly narrative. So in one of the most powerful sequences of the film, just before the wife undergoes an abortion, we see how a group of children are working on a jigsaw puzzle, fitting together pieces reproducing Leonardo da Vinci's Annunciation. The picture is dismembered and spread out on the floor, and as the camera films them from above, the children are not only made part of the ensemble, but they are incorporated within the pattern, overlaid as images over images. The picture alludes to the crucial element in the plot, the possible birth of a child whose father is unknown, and directs our attention to recurring static frames that constitute jigsaw puzzle-like tableau in the film, or in which different kinds of images are laid on top of each other in further frames. Now, Mantegna's image of the dead Christ seems to haunt this film as well. Elements of the painting resurfacing in two scenes. Once the man collapses in a reverse position, and in the attempted suicide scene, we see his wife in a similar way as Christ in the painting. Now, focusing this time more on the figure of the woman, who is depicted with a dense mesh of pictorial references, the film draws a similar trajectory from filmic presence, painterly stylization, to the photograph as a recording of the moment and object of memory, and back to the one seen in the return, offering a synthesis in the photo of Vera and her two young children captured in the pose paraphrasing Da Vinci's Virgin and the Child with St. Anne and John the Baptist. As such, if Balfi's use of conceptual body horror in taxidermia can be positioned at the extreme of morbid satire, and as such a narrative literalization of contemporary art's fetishism of bodies exhibited as objects, Zviagintsev's films, gracefully weaving together painting, cinema, and photography, may be placed on the other pole as examples for a poetic use of embodied images as embodied ideas. Now, for a conclusion, This inclination towards artificiality in the image in the form of the shot we can isolate as an autonomous entity resembling a painting may be linked to what Mario Perniola considers the Egyptian moment in art. Perniola finds that in the history of humanity, I quote, "the Egyptian mummy alone evokes such a radical will to become a thing, as we witness today when humans deliberately treat themselves as objects being engaged in various processes of self-mummification. Moreover, instead of perceiving the world as a spectacle, we are more inclined to see it in terms of a landscape that is something distant, incomprehensible, foreign, and far away." I quote Perniola, "Tableaux vivants, which appear alongside dance to have been one of the ancient Egyptians' favorite forms of spectacle, conveyed just this form of bewilderment and estrangement. This is a more general feature of ancient Egyptian art, which rather than striving to mimic nature, seeks to create things that are independent of it, endowed with equal dignity and autonomy." The tableau sequences in these films appear not only like anamorphic details emerging within the cinematic frame, but as such things among things endowed with mysterious dignity and autonomy. Just think of the ways Zviagintsev's boys look at their father trying to identify the image presented to them in the bedroom with the photograph they have of him, a look representing the perplexity of the spectators themselves comparing the cinematic shot with Mantegna's Christ. On the other hand, when humans are treated as pictures, the fluidity of the moving image, imitating the flow of life, becomes visibly contained within a certain aesthetic order and structure. Chance movements are substituted by the predetermined spatial organization of a particular picture frame and by the universality of symbol and the endurance of myth. We may connect this feature to what Lyotard termed in his short essay titled A Cinema as the figure of return, that is the folding back of diversity upon an identical unity. Lyotard speaks of the structure of classical narrative films that tend to return to identical patterns, shaping films as, I quote, productive consumable objects, as opposed to what he defines as the uncontained movement of jouissance, seen as pure, unproductive fireworks and détournement in experimental avant-garde art. In the references to well-known paintings, we may also find a similar movement of retournement to a fixed familiar pattern, repeatedly, I quote, absorbing diversity into unity, where this movement is not one that folds cinema as representation back onto the world, as in the case of classical narratives, but back onto the interpretive frame of visual arts, channeling cinematic diversity back to recognizable sameness in painting, thus restructuring the cinematic image as a consumable object for art connoisseur audiences. This movement of return is symptomatic, I think, of a nostalgia for tradition, characteristic of what has been described for some time as postmodern art. The films harness the power of grand images to generate meta-narratives, and instead of acting primarily as a disruption within the flow of narration, the tableau vivant here becomes a blueprint for a big picture, a comprehensive vision of the world, reinforced by recurring mythological themes like the Genesis or the end of the world, the loss of paradise, etc. All of Palfi's jouissant fireworks in Taxidermia return to what Lyotard calls good form, in the symmetry of the timeless triptych structure and in the final display of the body as archaic torso. Zviagintsev's The Return constructs a circular meta-narrative, ritualizing the passage from image to body and back to image. In the case of The Banishment, the whole film is presented as an enigma, where the viewer should labor on the reconstruction of the whole big picture, just like the children who reassemble pieces of Da Vinci's painting. And while the narratives present the failure of their characters to become heroes of mythical proportion, these films themselves can be viewed as allegories of this very urge for reconstruction, reinstatement, and re-embodiment of myths. By repeatedly showing us bodies dying into art and ideas reified as images, these films present us over and over again with a yearning for a reintegration into something universal and lasting, with a yearning for life recomposed as an image. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for a fascinating paper. I was taken aback while at the same time impressed by the quotations from Lyotard and the ensuing conclusions that you drew, because I relaxed into supposing that a complicity between Tableau, Vivant, and the classical literature on photography as itself a representation or intimation of death in the living subject would be somehow offset or challenged by the vitality and kinetic energies of film as a life force. But your conclusion suggests that the integration of, as it were, the allies, Tableau, Vivant, and photography into film bends the film back itself in the direction of a holistic form that can be understood as an image, therefore a vision of some sort of universal sense of the world. Do you see any tension between the tension of the stillness of photography and Tableau Vivant and the movement of film, and the idea that these integral elements within these films that you emphasize actually suggest film itself wishing to return to the status of the still image?
Yes, I see that. That's exactly my point. I think you understood it perfectly. That this tension is not masked, it's not subsumed, it's presented. And I think Palfi's film is the most eloquent example. So it's beautiful as a concept, but it's horrific to look at it because it is so naturalistic, or one could even say disgusting, to see all those internal organs, the person being disemboweled and transformed into an art object. So this is, but nevertheless, there's this movement back and forth. So pulling them apart and laying bare these tensions, these irreconcilable extremes, which cannot be reconciled. It's laid bare, it's out there in the open, but then it's folded back again. That's why I thought that maybe Lyotard's, this notion of retournement is applicable here. Yes?
Another aspect of cinéma is the erotic tension,
yes,
that the static image projects and creates in the spectator. And I noticed that the title of the anthology for which you're writing your essay is something about senses.
Yes,
and I just wondered whether you were also going to be addressing this kind of Klaussowskian eroticism that Lyotard is fascinated in, because Tableau Vivant sort of arises as a pornographic spectacle in the 18th century.
Yes, the censure I will be addressing in that other study, which I couldn't just barely mention here. That was the result actually of our one of our previous conferences. We had a conference with the same title, The Cinema of Sensation, which was a highly successful conference. We had Laura Marks as a keynote speaker. You can watch the keynote speak online. and Ivan Spielmann. And following that, I stood down and wrote this essay where, yes, but not erotic. So I dwell very much on the sensual aspects in the sense of Deleuze and Deleuze's writings on Bacon, on the paintings of Francis Bacon, but not especially erotic, because these films are not usually, they don't have, they don't thematize eroticism like Greenaway does, always, but they are sensual.